DOCSIS 3.1 and Wi-Fi 6, how fast can we go? This is episode 61 of Get Your Tech On, our show on all things DOCSIS. I'm Brady Volp, founder of Nimble This and a Volp firm. With us today is John Downey, CMTS technical leader at Cisco Systems. John, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back.
Oh,
Go live.
so how was, did you have Cisco Live? Did that event go off?
Yeah. I didn't even have to cue you on that one to give a a selfless plug when someone else is plugging your stuff. Thanks. Yeah, Cisco Live was last week, and I believe there was like 120,000 people registered. I mean, what do you expect when it's free, right? So yeah, it was. They said 53% first time viewers or whatever, which makes sense too because they can never afford to go. So if it's free, then I can get good information. It was all centered. It seemed, even for me, it was new to me because Cisco's so huge, right? My microcosm is cable and DOCSIS, and we're small BU compared to Cisco as a whole, 75,000 employees or so. But they talked about social, um, you know, well-being, the current state of affairs, the pandemic, capacity, security was a big one. There was announcements on WebEx and some new stuff coming out with WebEx, which was kind of cool. What else was there? Wi-Fi, 5G was a big one. And I even listened in on the 5G one, and it talked about service provider and how they, and I believe this will be true. 5G is going to work with and against cable. In some cases, 5G might be your only option to get higher speed data if there is no cable. But RBU is looking at what happens when you're in rural America and you already have fiber out to this cow field, but they can't afford to put up a little micro antenna for 5G. But maybe we can do 5G mobile backhaul over the DOCSIS network. So there's a case where I could see people with mobile phones and wired connections. That one's an interesting one because I always thought when I had satellite that, how bad it was. I was like, man, if I had 5G, I would go to 5G and use my cell phone as a hotspot. But now that I do have fiber to the home, I'm like, knowing that you have a wired connection somewhere that doesn't get affected by any outside interference, whether it be RF, weather, anything, right? Snow. I think there will always be a requirement for a wired connection. Now in the house is a different story, which leads in well to what we're talking about, right? Next, Wi-Fi 6, and where does
Yes.
that come into play?
But it is interesting that because you have had the experience with satellite, and just recently, the uh, God, I'm drawing a blank on his Tesla guy. He's got approval, and I
Elon,
think some other, yeah,
Elon,
Elon Musk and his company has gotten approval, and I think some other folks have gotten approval for satellite-based coverage in rural areas, and they're going to get funding from the federal government to do this under that Broadband Act to give coverage in underserved areas. Do that through satellite technology. And I think that's really interesting because that really wasn't in a way that I would ever foresee covering underserved areas through satellite because kind of based on your experience, a lot of our long-term viewers have seen how poor the video and audio can be real time coming from someone who's using a satellite, aka you, John. And
yeah,
then we were
yeah.
so happy when you finally got fiber and we got a nice solid connection. So I think satellite technology can be really good. I'm kind of interested to see what the satellite technology that Elon Musk is offering is. He's promising it's going to be low jitter, at low latency,
I
better
saw that too.
performance than what we have right now. But I just, I really struggle to see how
But
they can
isn't it
offer
also
something that good.
LEE, low Earth orbit,
It is low
LEO?
Earth orbit, but I mean, you're still talking about low Earth
Yeah.
orbit,
Then
still like
22,000
20,
miles, it'll be
22,000
11,000
miles.
miles.
Yeah,
Of
that's still going to add delay and
course.
jitter and latency. Is
Maybe that's how he's getting around the terminology. It'll be better than normal satellite.
yeah,
That
yeah,
doesn't
I
make sense.
guess, I guess, but it's going to be a challenge. Um, but yeah, that's see how it rolls out, and
I
maybe we'll
agree.
get to see see someone on that type of network.
Hey,
But
but with that said, something's better than nothing. Could
yes,
you imagine being in the middle of nowhere and not
and
having
having
any
dial
access
up.
to it? Knowledge is power. And this is where I think really we could all help from this industry with the social inequality stuff. everybody needs access. And sooner or later, and someone even mentioned this, sooner or later, this will be thought of as a utility and
Yes,
needed.
I think
So,
you mentioned that some time ago. I have heard some conversations come up about that, in
yeah.
the media. It's been brought up, so it's gonna be interesting to see how that all
We don't
rolls
want
out.
it to be,
No, definitely not.
because then there's like requirements and there's control and all this other stuff and oversight, and we like the free market.
Yes,
The free market is what got us where we are right now.
and I
Faster.
I think it's really incumbent on cable operators and telecom providers, both sides, to realize that as long as they keep providing really good service, it's not going to get regulated. If we
Yes.
don't provide really good service and we don't continue to push out in the underserved areas, the risk of it being regulated is real.
Yeah.
Keep
I agree.
going, keep pushing,
Yeah.
making the networks better. On to our topic today, DOCSIS 3.1 and Wi-Fi 6. And John, you were the one who really brought in the Wi-Fi 6 part of this because I hadn't thought about that before. With why should subscribers, why should cable operators buy new modems, upgrade to DOCSIS 3.1? Adding that Wi-Fi 6 component, I think, is really critical, and we'll get into that later on into the show. You mentioned we don't know about a lot about Wi-Fi 6. I've actually done a lot of research on Wi-Fi 6, so I've got some statistics. We'll get into that later on. But overall, I think this aspect of the show of DOCSIS 3.1, we have DOCSIS 3.1 networks out there, we have OFDM out there, but understanding at what point do we have enough 3.1 modems that it actually starts? Where's that inflection point of getting enough 3.1 modems out there that we're taking advantage of DOCSIS 3.1 in the downstream? And then I think the ancillary to that of why we're talking about Wi-Fi 6 is some of the new 3.1 modems out there come with Wi-Fi 6 enabled, which is adding that Wi-Fi capability. We'll talk about that shortly. Lets you take advantage of the higher speeds that we get with DOCSIS 3.1 within the home. So, John, I guess I'll let you maybe take a first stab at this and your thoughts of why should a cable operator start buying DOCSIS 3.1 modems? Why should a homeowner think about buying a DOCSIS 3.1 modem when they already have a really large supply of 3.0 modems out there? And a subscriber maybe already has purchased a 3.0 modem. They've made that investment. What's the reason to start buying more 3.1 modems?
And the other flip side or argument there would be, as new technology comes out, the older technology gets cheaper. So there is a big advantage to buying 3.0 modems because they're getting a lot cheaper. Because as the 3.1 comes out, they try to the vendors start offloading the older 3.0 modems. Now
Yeah,
I thought it
and
was
that can be a trap, right? Because
yeah.
so I did look. We talked about pricing, I think, early on, and I did some canvassing of what operators are paying pricing for. And 3.0 modems, the lowest price I found, they can be as cheap as $25 for a 3.0 modem, and these are, these are in bulk. These are like the cheapest of the cheap 3.0 modems. It's almost a chipset in a little tiny box with an F connector on them. I would say they're probably not the best 3.0 modems out there, but if you want to go cheap, you can get really cheap 3.0 modems. A lot of operators for 3.0 modems might be paying into $35 to even up as $45 range for more quality 3.0 modems that you want running in their plant, and they may not include Wi-Fi in them, but they're still quality 3.0 modems that are out there. So if you're looking at buying in bulk, get some good deals on 3.0 modems. Whereas 3.1 modems, they're going to be starting at the very bottom edge in the $40 price range and go all the way up to start getting into gateways and stuff like that, over $100 for a good quality 3.1 modem. So that can be a challenge for cable operators when they start looking at it. Buy a lot of modems, they're going to be renting these out. A lot easier to go to 3.0 modems. You're going to save a lot of money, and also for a subscriber, if they want to buy their own modem, it's going to be a lot easier to buy that 3.0 modem versus buying a 3.1 modem. A lot cheaper to buy that 3.0 modem.
So there's a couple of points there you kind of hit. Was what is the architecture in the house? And I do believe Comcast looking at, and I thought it was a good idea, and I said this a long time ago, as you get fiber deeper, how deep do you go? Fiber to the tap, so you have no coax and just drop line? Do you do fiber to the home, but you still have coax in the house? We are trying to get fiber as deep as possible, limit the coax, especially if we want to upgrade your upstream frequency spectrum to potentially 684 megahertz, which is a lot for upstream. But a home gateway would be the way to go. If you eliminate all the coax in the house and it's all Ethernet in the house and Wi-Fi in the house, there's no RF ingress anymore, right? It's you could still have some Wi-Fi ingress and frequency overlaps with your microwave or something or other Wi-Fi devices. It's open spectrum over the air. But if you had wired Ethernet, then that's kind of a nice clean solution. Still got to wire it. But if I'm looking at the typical house where there might be 2 or 3 modems in it, one modem for high speed data and maybe some set top box with a modem in it, now I'm like, I have a different problem. I have DOCSIS set top gateway DSG. It might be a 2.0 modem in there. Um, and that becomes difficult as well because every house now has 3 modems and not just one. And when you look at SID space, service identifiers, every upstream service flow has a SID. And every upstream bonded modem that's doing something called SID cluster 2 to get better upstream speeds, it's using 2 SIDs for every best effort flow. So I mean, there's a lot of
Yeah,
consider.
I didn't think about what you're, with particularly the DSG, DOCSIS set-top gateways. Those are adding more modems. Those present yet another challenge. I want to mention, I didn't take into account European customers that are, so throwaway counts as they're paying about 80 euros. So like, $90 or more for DOCSIS 3.0 modems. So I think different markets are seeing different price ranges for even changing on that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in Brazil, they had a 12% tax on hardware, or 18% tax on hardware and 12% tax on software.
Yep.
So one way around that was to start buying hardware equipment with a licensing capability. That way, you bought the hardware at the lowest price for 18% tax, and then you would start buying software features and stuff like that. It wasn't included in the hardware because
That's
if it
more
was
on the
software, you only pay
like on the
12% tax.
CMTS side, or you're saying they're also doing that on the modem side?
You remember on the CMTS side
Yep.
where you would buy capacity on the old line cards, there was no real software or licensing.
Right.
But once you came out with a licensing idea, it's software, you could get maybe a lower tax rate.
Yep.
So yeah, there's definitely tariffs and tax rates for international that are different. Um, yeah, you could see a lot of concerns there as far as price goes. But back to the Wi-Fi coverage and stuff like that, I thought it was interesting when I did a cable in out for 3.1 years ago, a year and a half ago, and Comcast I mentioned is like, would Comcast actually deploy a 3.1 modem today, not knowing if it's been vetted out for upstream? Like they knew they were going to offer 1 gig downstream, so 3.1 downstream was a must. I said, but what if 3.1 upstream? We need a second or third spin of silicon from Broadcom and Intel or whoever. Would you deploy today? I said, yeah. They said basically we can't wait. And one of the reasons they were deploying the 3.1 modems was not even for 3.1 capacity at the time. It was for the Wi-Fi capability and the gateway and the functionality. I was like, that's interesting.
How do you see? Is there a lot of push for gateways still? Because I kind of struggle with the gateways. At one point, I thought it was a great idea, and the whole concept with gateways, we're going to put all the video processing horsepower on the gateways, and we're going to have dumb set-top boxes. We push all the video to the set-top boxes. I just don't. Oh, and then one time we are going to put DVRs in the set-top boxes, but all this stuff's going into the cloud now,
Yeah.
and streaming is really changing everything because not doing linear video in the way we used to do. So
I mean, you could look at it as the architecture idea is cool, but maybe not the whole idea of just a gateway. Even if you just said, I just want to centrally locate my modem in my house and use Wi-Fi throughout my house. That's what a lot of people are doing now, right?
but
I mean,
I don't see
Wi-Fi.
that being as practical. And again, let's talk about Wi-Fi 6 just a little bit. The Wi-Fi
Mhm.
6 increases, your speed by 25% at least. It gives us the ability, at least with Wi-Fi 6, to start getting close to or doing a gigabit per second. They say much faster speeds than that, but realistically, if we look at the bench speeds, the test speeds that like CNET has done, PC World Magazine has done, we with Wi-Fi 5, the current 802.11 AC speeds, realistically in any home on the 5 gigahertz channel, you can typically get 400 to maybe 500 megabits per second to whatever device you're doing, your laptop, iPhone, iPad. Those are good speeds provided you're close to the access point. That's on 802.11ac, the current standard, the previous standard.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi 6, the new standard, 802.11ax is the brand new standard. It's brand new. It came out, I think, last September, last October, and now we're actually getting devices that we can do that. The testing that they're doing gets us up to about 800 to 900 megabits per second on real devices in real houses. However, you have to be reasonably close to the access point in order to do that. So, to your point, if we get a cable modem with 802.11ax or Wi-Fi 6 in it, you really can't centrally locate that modem. That's kind of one of the things that I struggle, and I would struggle as a cable operator or as a subscriber getting a modem with Wi-Fi built into it. As soon as unless you're just living in an apartment, you almost immediately are going to start adding additional access points to that modem or a mesh network or something like that, because the coverage of Wi-Fi 6, while it gives you great performance, you need to be close to it if you want to obtain those speeds. And with DOCSIS 3.1, we're saying we can do a gigabit per second into people's homes. That means you want that access point to also do darn close to a gigabit per second if we're starting to look towards future-proofing us over the next couple of years.
So the 802.11ac is both bands, right? 2.4 gigahertz and 5
And
gigahertz.
5 gigahertz, yes.
And in Wi-Fi 6, didn't
Also,
they? And it's ironic is, first time I heard Wi-Fi 6, I thought it meant 6 gigahertz. And
yeah,
then 6 gigahertz was actually added in. So it does kind of mean it, but it
yes.
didn't mean it originally. But I think isn't 6 gigahertz band added in for Wi-Fi 6?
Actually, I'm not
I
sure if
read
the 6
somewhere it was.
gigahertz band is, but the big things are is with Wi-Fi 5, the current standard 802.11ac, we have an 80 megahertz channel. With Wi-Fi 6, they take that 80 megahertz channel and take it up to 160 megahertz. So we've doubled that channel bandwidth. We've also increased, so we're using OFDM in Wi-Fi 6,
Yeah.
similar to DOCSIS 3.1. We're also using with OFDM, we're also going up to, I think I have that in my show notes here. We're using up to 1024 QAM with Wi-Fi 6, whereas with Wi-Fi 5, we only did 256 QAM. So, there's kind of a lot of similarities between what's happening in Wi-Fi 6 and what's happening with DOCSIS 3.1. We have the bidirectional communication, so kind of like things with FDX, so all devices can communicate bidirectionally in Wi-Fi 6. So, we're looking at 25% faster speeds. We're having the bidirectional communication with all devices on the network. So the speed is much faster, much wider channels. But with all this, because the channel's wider, because we're doing 1024 OFDM or 1024 QAM and OFDM, that's not going to go as far. It's not going to go through. And we're doing 5Gs to obtain these speeds. 5G, 6G, or 5 gigahertz, 6 gigahertz is not going to go through walls as well as the 4 gigahertz. And 2.4 gigahertz, like what we see many places, is just so congested. It also gets impacted by things like microwave ovens and stuff like that. So there's
Actually,
fantastic benefits.
let's reword that, because it's inversely proportional to wavelength. A higher frequency is a lower wavelength, so a smaller wavelength actually gets through materials better, like an X-ray. It's just that the higher frequency incurs more attenuation.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
attenuated, and I've actually experienced this. It is surprising that a lot of people don't understand that you can't put your single cable modem access point in your basement and expect it to go up through, drywall and sheetrock and stuff like that and go through walls at 5G. The 2.4 gigahertz will go through it. It doesn't get attenuated as much, but it gets so much impact from your neighbors' access points, from ovens, from a lot of other noise that's in that 2.4 hertz
It
band.
would have been interesting a long time ago if they would have made the antenna a dongle. Like I see a lot of new developments where they put the modem and stuff in a cabinet. I'm like, you don't want to put it in a cabinet and close the door,
Yes.
because it's probably blocking your Wi-Fi. It would have been cool to be able to take the Wi-Fi antenna out and like just put it outside your wall or whatever.
So they do make external antennas for some access points, and then sometimes they make these like really big antennas, like, oh, this antenna has 12 dBi of gain and stuff. But people sometimes don't realize that just because you have a really big antenna, the modem can transmit really high power, and can also receive really low signals. But the devices that you have, that just means that it's going to be receiving and transmitting to devices really, really far away. And the Wi-Fi device kind of drops its transmit and receive power to the lowest common denominator. So that cell phone that it's picking up at your neighbor's house, it's now going to be communicating with it, uh, and it's going to drop its RSI. It's going to drop its basically transmit and receive levels to that modem. So that's when you get into like modems or access points that have multiple transmitters and receivers, which Wi-Fi 6 also has. Wi-Fi 5 has that, but it's based on your chipset. How many devices can it communicate at the same time?
Yeah.
Another benefit
So
of
the other
Wi-Fi
one I want to
6.
point out was talk about the CPE and another thing that adds cost to the CPE would EMTAs. And I believe most of them have a built-in embedded multimedia terminal app for voice. I saw a pattern of voice just dropping off because mobile phones. But now that people are working from home, a lot more EMTA, UGS flows are occurring. There's a lot more people utilizing their voice capability if they have it in their modem. Whereas before, there was hardly anyone using it. Voice call capacity on CMTS was like show cable calls, 20 calls. Out of 50,000 modems, 20 calls. So really that wasn't being utilized much at all because everyone has mobile phones. But
Yes.
now that people are home, they're doing Wi-Fi calling. Mobile usage actually went down quite a bit. So you're doing Wi-Fi calling, they're doing everything online, they're using their EMTA for voice calls. What scared me for a while is the people that aren't using the EMTA for voice calls, but doing teleconferencing, just like we're doing right now.
Yep.
And this voice is the best ever flow over my modem if I had
Right.
them.
Yes. So it's best effort, and I that should be something everyone realizes, that all of this, the video, the voice, everything is best effort. There is no unsolicited grant service for this because it's not controlled or managed by the CMTS and the cable modem. None of this is like in the MTA part of the modem, unless it is like you're paying for that voice service from the cable operator.
Right.
But it is still amazing how good it is. We're not breaking up, we're not jittering, as long as the network has enough bandwidth to support it,
Yeah,
and that's the critical part.
you just jinxed us, man.
But I think that brings us to the part of why, if you have, say, 32 channels of SC-QAM, that gives you a little over a gigabit per second of downstream capacity.
1.2. About
1.2 gigabits. If you have 192 megahertz of OFDM channels, that at say, well, 10, let's say 1024 QAM, because that would be comparable for the same MER of 256 QAM for those 32 SC QAM channels, and 24 QAM, same MER. You don't have to change anything in your plan in the downstream. That gives you 1.5, almost 1.6 gig for 192 megahertz channel. So now you put that 192 megahertz channel in, but you can't use it until you start getting DOCSIS 3.1 modems. And I think that's kind of the crux of the discussion here. What drives getting 3.1 modems so you can start taking heavy users or any users off of those 32 SC QAM channels and move them to the OFDM channel range?
So here's our choices, right? One, number of CPE out there that can use it. Two, allocating spectrum if you even have spectrum. And then what would be the third one? Third one is
Cost.
Cost.
Cost is a driver.
Oh, licensing of the spectrum, right? Of the CMTS, the resources.
Well, we're assuming we already have the licensing there because we have. I've already said the operator put the 192 megahertz block there.
Okay. You already had spectrum. You allocated somehow. You turned it on. You paid for it. That's why I think Comcast originally didn't do 192.
They did 96.
The number of CPE that could take advantage of it. They're like, well, we don't have spectrum. It might be 1 gigahertz in some plants, but some plants are at 750 still.
Yeah. So even if you put a 96 megahertz block there, because you have no 3.1 modems out there, you're still looking at what, 800 megabits per second on it.
Of course. Plus, they're cross bonding that with the existing 32 channels or 24 channels they already had.
Yes.
The single carrier QAMs. So if you had 24,
so you're close to 2 gig.
That's worth 800 and some megabits per second, and then you had another 700. That's 1.5 gig. You could offer a 1 gig service from a 1.5 gig aggregate pipe.
Absolutely.
As long as not too many people are signing up for it. But,
yes. it depends on what your oversubscription rate
Yeah.
is in that. But that
So
still, that allows you to compete with anyone else around, especially if they're running fiber. That's saying, "Hey, we're offering a gig service in our fiber network
part
directly
of it
with
is
them."
perception and marketing, right?
Yep.
It's being able to go out there and say, yeah, I can offer 1 gig, so that your customers don't jump ship and run over to the competitor. Like,
And
well, I
and
can
that's
get 1 gig from you
Yeah, and
guys.
that's exactly what's happening. So, but to offer that 1 gig, you've got to get a lot of your customers 3.1 modems and get them off the 3.0 modems. And I think
Correct.
that's what is the inflection point? How do we have to
And
look at that? How many modems do we have to get them over that hump?
so I thought about that more on upstream, because on the downstream side, you already told me you allocated some spectrum and you allocated a license, and it could take one customer. I mean, I'm still going to utilize that spectrum, and maybe I could start out 24 megahertz and cross band. Or really, the whole point of DOCSIS 3.1 and deploying a 3.1 modem is to offer a peak speed. You're not worried about sharing a 300 meg service. It's because you need to offer a 500 meg service or a 1 gig service. I can offer a 500 meg service with a 3.0 modem, no problem. But if you need to offer a 1 gig service to not lose a customer, then you got to give them a 3.1 modem.
Right.
So it's there's a point where all it takes is one or two or a handful of customers for you to justify uh, activating DOCSIS 3.1 downstream, because you're going to do it anyway. And then whatever you activate, anyone else has a 3.1 modem can more efficiently utilize that spectrum because higher modulation schemes. You mentioned 1024 QAM. We have plenty of cases where I'm running 4K QAM, no problems. So I can get even higher speeds. And even a customer that doesn't need the higher speed, any traffic he does, he's on and off the wire quicker because he's doing higher modulation. So that means more time in the wire for other people. So, I mean, there's an advantage there. You could look at latency, or it's quicker.
So, I mean,
I was concerned with
I
the
I
inflection point
argue
for
that
up.
a DOCSIS 3.1 modem, and I think you're saying the same thing, performs better than a 3.0 modem. So
Correct.
one of the aspects is latency, right? It's going to have better performance, it's going to have better latency, it's going to get better speed if it's locked to the 3.1 channel. Do you agree with that?
True. I do and I don't. I mean, higher speed does not mean better latency. Just because you give something higher speed doesn't mean the snappiness is quicker. Um,
But if you look at the aggregate traffic within a home, you've got multiple users, you've got multiple people that are saying one person's gaming while the other person in the house is watching Netflix, and then the third person in the house is doing a test. So from that perspective, I think I look back to what you're saying. You're getting that data down, and you're getting off the network quicker. But what's the overall impact in that subscriber's house?
I mean, really, if you offer a bigger pipe that everybody's sharing, a bigger aggregates pipe, then you have less chance of congestion. If there's less chance of congestion, there's no backoffs, there's no resends. So in that case, you're fine. But if, let's say, there's no congestion and it's a gaming flow that's only 5 megabits per second, it's like nothing. But if I make that customer do 32 channel bonding and that 5 megabit per second flow, I can make a case where that 5 megabit per second flow might actually show better latency and jitter results on single carrier, like a DOCSIS 2.0 modem. There's some cases where,
Because it's not spreading traffic across the
yes,
entire
yes,
downstream. Yeah.
resequencing of traffic, spreading of traffic, uh, uh, interleaving on each one of them. So there's cases where we could say, and case in point, when I went from 4 channel downstream bonding to 8 channel downstream bonding, I had problems with voice traffic because the voice traffic was being bonded across more downstreams. And that voice downstream was like 115 kilobits per second, but it's being spread across multiple downstreams. When we came out with a command to not bond downstream voice, it got much better. So there's a case in point where I could say
You would
a
want to do
low
the same thing
speed
for any
flow
slow
could
speed like
benefit
gaming
from a
traffic.
smaller bonding group,
Yep.
just because of latency and jitter. Yeah, that one's still kind of up in the air about gaming. Um, and I guess it also depends on the gaming application of how it really does. Uh, Gaming is a TCP application, right? Is
No,
it?
that's a
It's
good
real
question,
time.
John. I actually don't know
I
for sure.
know.
I know you're absolutely right. Everything, unless you're doing something like what Google's doing with their Stadia, um, all gaming is extremely small amounts of data that you're sending back and forth. All
Yeah,
all the processing is done on your computer, so it's basically just mouse click strokes or small.
you know, I don't know if
But but
it's
there's a
considered
lot of
real
gaming
time.
going on, and there's money behind gaming and esports right now. So this is an
That's
opportunity for the industry.
So back to your inflection point idea, I was more concerned on upstream because upstream we have limited spectrum. And if I can't carve out any spectrum for 3.1, and I want to make this clear, I don't promote TAFDM at all, the time and frequency division multiplexing, where you share spectrum for 3.0 and 3.1 on top of each other because it becomes very inefficient. Um, you have to have guard time and quiet time in between switching from a 3.1 and 3.0 modem. So I'd rather keep it simple, the old KISS principle. I'd rather allocate spectrum for 3.0 and 3.1, just like we do downstream. I'd rather do that on the upstream. But the upstream is so limited. The question that comes up is, at what point do I start robbing Peter to pay Paul? At what point do I take away a couple ATDMA to make more OFDMA? So I was just, and I think we talked about this before, and I thought the inflection point to me, I think, is lower than what most people would originally conceive or believe. Like most people would probably say 25%, and I'm thinking 10%. I'm thinking if 10% of my modems are
10%, I'm
upstream fiber
shocked.
node,
I would have thought it'd be much higher than that.
yeah, I'm thinking 10%. And the reason why I say that is the old, I guess it would be an axiom. The old axiom, I guess, is 10% of your modems are eating up 85% of your bandwidth. That old saying, where there's just a few heavy hitters that are typically using up most of your upstream utilization,
Yep.
unless you're controlling them somehow, which usually we don't do that. We might do deep packet inspection just to see who the heavy hitters are. We could do subscriber traffic management to do byte counting and put them into penalty
Okay.
boxes if they exceed a certain amount of bytes, a certain amount of time. But what I'm getting at is if 10% of the heavy hitters are using DOCSIS 3.1 modems, or I give them a 3.1 modem, I could essentially push them into 3.1 spectrum, alleviate the 3.0/2.0 spectrum for all the other users to share it more efficiently.
Right. And I think I understand where your 10% number is coming from because we see this consistently, operator to operator, where 10% of the traffic on the network is driven by 10% of the worst offenders in the network, and the other 90% are not doing that much on the network at any given time. And I do want to throw in here because I think this is actually really relevant to the conversation. From the chat room, that they're saying most games are UDP, which makes a lot of sense. First-person shooters and stuff like that. You click the button
Right.
to shoot someone, you're not going to get a response, and then that's also why you start to see a lot of jitter and stuff in games, particularly first-person shooters, because you're not getting that acknowledgement back saying I dropped that packet. So when you're in a highly congested network, especially in the evening when networks are really bad, that's when you really get impacted by gaming. So it gets to be really problematic, and you start to get that lag. So thanks, throwaway accountant Brian, for that information. That's information there.
And
So
I suspect the game itself is UDP, but
yep.
the people that are videotaping themselves or videoing themselves playing the game and sending it on the upstream, that's, I don't know if that's the UDP. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
So
The game
yeah,
itself is probably UDP.
so we're doing a YouTube stream right now, and I think when you get packet loss on the stream that we're going to YouTube, this is UDP. So because we get lost packets, we get lost voice. It's not
Yes,
like YouTube says, "Hey, please pause what you're doing right now on this live stream and retransmit whatever you just said." It's just
yeah.
not possible. It's not going to happen,
Anything that's
man.
real, yeah. Anything that's real time is UDP. Like
Yep.
I even looked at that for a while to find out about. I've been doing a lot of Sirius XM radio over my Wi-Fi, but then I'm like, all right, well, Sirius XM radio is still a satellite, even though it's going through my Wi-Fi.
They probably buffer. They just do a
That's
lot more buffering.
Yeah, I've
It's
noticed
like the
that you
old
can.
CDs when you had a CD
Yeah,
player in your car, and we're dating ourselves here.
yeah,
They when you'd hit a bump, you get that skip, and then they started doing like 8 times and 24 times over sampling on the CDs. Now you could hit a bump, and
right,
you wouldn't get the skip in your music. Wow, we're old,
correct.
John.
But on that side of internet radio, if you look at Pandora and Spotify, that is internet radio.
Yes.
That is TCP.
I would bet it is because you you don't hear
Not
skips and
really
stuff
real
like that.
time.
Yeah. Yeah, I would bet it is. So let's get the 10%. And that makes it really easy for operators then because they can look at their 10% of high users. And if they're leasing modems, you just send that 10% DOCSIS 3.1 users and get them off of your SC QAMs. Eventually you can put an
So,
OFDMA
so
channel in a
I'll give you an
return.
example. We had a customer that implemented OFDMA, and they went from 4 ATDMA down to 3. They just used up one 6.4 megahertz and opened up some spectrum in the roll off up 40 to 42 and opened up OFDMA. And then those 3.1 modems started utilizing. In our code, the 3.1 modems prefer 3.1 spectrum before they eat into the 3.0 spectrum, which is a good idea, right?
Yep.
So it doesn't equally distribute traffic across all the cross bonded channels. I don't even want that. I want the 3.1 modem to use up all the 3.1 channel.
Dedicated to it.
Yes, before it starts eating into the 3.0, because everybody else has to share the 3.0 spectrum.
Yes.
2.0, same
Including
here.
like DOCSIS 2.0 set-top boxes you're still going to
Exactly.
have on a network. They're just going to use
Exactly.
one
So
downstream channel.
yes. So that they're in they did that, and they found that even though they got rid of an ATDMA, by moving the 3.1 modems and heavy hitters over to OFDMA at higher modulation, more efficient usage of spectrum, the utilization on ATDMAs dropped quite a bit. Not the linear fashion you would have expected, right? Like if I have 4 channels all at 50% and I drop one, then technically the last 3 should go up to like 60 or 65. And they dropped the 50, 50, 50 down to like 35, 40, 40.
Yep.
It
Yep.
dropped, even though I got rid of 25% capacity for the 3.0 modem, but I moved those heavy hitters over. You
Right.
understand?
Absolutely. So
But
so
from
after you
that, they said maybe we'll drop another one. Because if we drop another one, and here's why I like the idea of 2 ATDMA and the rest of it OFDMA.
right, which
When
is
you
what we
drop
talked about
two
I think we
channel,
talked about that at the last show.
yeah, 2 channel bonding, you gain 3 dB in max transmit power.
Oh yeah, modems.
Yeah, so you get 3 dB back in max transmit for the 3.0 modems.
Yes, particularly
Also,
with
the
the modems
drop,
that don't have the extended transmit power
exactly.
again in them, which
Yep,
are
yep.
so max transmit power with 4 upstreams is 52 and a
51,
half or 51 and a half.
51, 51, 51, 51, all
One.
across all 4, 6.4,
So when you go to
64.
2 ATD in the upstream, now we get to 54. Is that the max
Yes.
transmit?
Yep.
54. So that can be the difference between a modem being online and offline, especially in the
And
summertime.
it could be even if you have band-aids in there to keep a modem online, we call it max channel power offset or power just continue. Having a modem hit the CMTS lower than 0 or lower than everybody else means he's closer to the noise floor.
Yep.
So that 3 dB could be the difference of running with no uncorrectable FEC
Yeah, I was gonna say
versus a lot of
correctables,
uncorrectable,
uncorrectables. Yeah.
or going to partial mode,
Yep.
or going offline because the MER is bad, right?
Yeah, I had not considered that before. And you know, and I think that's even important for people to understand. I talk to customers like, "Hey, we're going to add additional upstreams in our return," but they don't realize adding those additional upstreams is going to cause modems to go offline because it's going to increase or it's going to decrease the max transmit power of those cable modems. So that's
Correct.
actually a really
And it's
good
like
point to think of,
it's a
especially when you
power
can
of
do
two.
OFDMA.
It's a power of two as well. Most people don't understand. If you go from 1 to 2, it's 3 dB. 2 to 4, but if you go 2 to 3, it's still 3 dB. It doesn't do a logarithmic 10 times a log of 3, which is 4.77. The code and the DOCSIS spec states that if you go from 2 channel upstream bonding to 3 channel upstream bonding, it's the same as if you did 4 channel upstream bonding.
Right.
You went above 2.
You might as well, if you're going to do 2, you might as well do 4.
Yeah, if you're going to do 3, you might as well do 4, right? So
Yeah,
once
that's
you
what
go up
I
2,
meant.
so that same mentality is like what happens when you go from 4 to 5. from 4 to 5, you might as well go to 8 because you
Yeah.
went above 4. That's another 3 dB drop max transmit.
Yeah, and we've covered
So
that so many times.
all,
Going
yeah,
going
all
to
these
eight's
people getting
problematic.
more upstream capacity by adding another ATDMA channel. I'm like, God, dude, man, you're killing me, Smalls. I'm like, I would rather you do
Eight,
less ATDMA and more OFDMA, and maybe keep that to a 4 channel bonding. Like if
and
I
and
did,
th- and there are
yeah,
so many problems when you go to 8-channel bonding because of in-home amplifiers. When we see this, I see this in so many systems. So I think to your point, I think your recommendation would be just don't add those extra AT to Ma's. Just put that in OFDMA.
yeah, just avoid the problem altogether. You're
Absolutely.
just tempting fate and making more problems. I can work around it. I have a lot of workarounds, but let's just revert back to keep it simple, you
Yep.
know?
So, all right. Other thoughts. So, I mean, once you get that past the first 10% of modems, just call it a day at that point and let attrition of DOCSIS 3.0 take care of the rest of migrating to DOCSIS 3.1.
I think therein lies the eighth layer of the OSI model, which is money, cost.
DBs
Therein lies,
and dollar bills.
yes, dollar bills. Indeed. So therein lies the bean counters and the what we just talked about. 3.0 modems are so cheap and getting cheaper.
Yes.
I'm
And
not
three
going to.
ones are still really expensive. There's no question about it.
Yeah, and the architecture in the house. You might say, yeah, I'm going to give that guy a 3.1 modem, but he still has 2 other DSG devices, so I'm not going to touch those. I'm not going to make them 3.1 devices because that's going to cost me even more money, and they don't need it because they're just using it for control channel for the DSG. More people are looking at multicast too, so now they are becoming more complex. They're not just doing control channel DOCSIS for control, 55-1 or 55-2 DSG. The over.
And so why are we looking at multicast? Just to describe multicast for people. So,
So, and that's interesting too, because I'm not really on the video side of DOCSIS as much as other colleagues of mine. But I will say this, that when we have multicast set up, a lot of that information is replicated and sent down every primary downstream. And here's where customers do capacity planning and they forget to take into account the map overhead for all your upstream. So more upstreams you activate, the more overhead on the primary downstream, and multicast overhead. So when customers are doing capacity planning, they said, oh, well, that single carrier QAM should be worth 38 megabits per second. I'm like, no, it's more like 36 after you take the map traffic off. And then they've like, oh, but I have a lot of multicast on there, but there's only one modem doing it. There's no modems on that primary downstream. It was replicated because all the primary downstreams has all that information replicated. And it could have been like 8 or 9 megabits per second of overhead.
yeah.
I'm like, man, you just killed 10
That's
meg on every primary downstream. If there's 20 primary downstreams, that's 240 meg you lost.
Yep.
I was like, oh yeah, that's a killer, understanding overhead and then when we get into remote PHY and distributed access architectures, does that overhead, is it on the SYN? The SYN is the converged interconnect network. And if you don't own that SYN, because it's part of like a WAN, like a Metro Ethernet or something, and you don't own that and you're renting it or leasing it or whatever, are you paying for traffic you're not reaping any benefit back?
yeah.
For instance, that map overhead is for the modems, but that traffic you're paying for on your SYN, but you're not reaping it back from your customer because it's not DOCSIS traffic. You understand?
Yeah, and the
For
sin,
any
which you and I
capacity
committed
planning.
many of, I'm sure, but for everyone who doesn't know explicitly what the CIN is the communication between the CMTS in the head end and the remote PHY, RPD, remote PHY device that is in that. It's basically how they communicate back and forth.
Yeah. And people will need to know those numbers for capacity planning. Are they paying for that overhead and for the capacity planning of the link itself?
Yes.
Probably a 10 gig link. right?
I think it's always a 10 gig link because the remote PHY itself is a single remote PHY device is doing at least a gig out of it, and normally you have
Yeah, yeah,
multiple remote PHY devices connected to that sync. Always gonna be a 10 gig link.
yeah. I mean, especially since SFPs have become much cheaper,
Yes.
less expensive.
So
So back to the topic.
we digress.
Yeah, always.
Um, so I think I was looking up. I think operators are still going to be getting DOCSIS 3.1 modems with Wi-Fi in them. When I was looking up, what 3.1 modems have Wi-Fi 6 in them, there is such a small list. Netgear, the Nighthawk has them. Era Surfboard AC2350 has them. The list gets really small after that, so there's only a couple of them out there. And I think something that cable operators are going to struggle with is they definitely going to be you're always going to have subscribers that are going to want Wi-Fi built into their cable modems, just because they're not all subscribers are going to be able to manage their own Wi-Fi. So if you're an operator and you want Wi-Fi built into your modems, the list is quite small right now. So it's still going to be a matter of time before vendors are coming out with a wider supply of modems out there. I think that's going to be a challenge, John.
Yeah, I would say the other one is we come back to analysis paralysis. Is like you're sitting on your hands, or whatever the metaphor I can use. Um, do I stay with 3.0? Do I do a 3.1 modem? Do I do a 3.1 modem with Wi-Fi 6? Or do I wait even longer for the next horizon, which should be, DOCSIS 4.0 modem,
LTE
the DOCSIS
embedded.
4.0 modem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
need
have you heard what is the timeline for DOCSIS 4.0 modem?
It's going to be end of the world this year anyway. So
Never.
the way 2020 is going, whatever.
Yeah, things
Yeah,
have
I
slowed
don't
down
know.
so much on the hardware front of 4.0 with what's happening.
So yeah, CPE kind of come to a halt for FDX, but 4.0 is not just FDX anymore, right? 4.0 is extended spectrum to 1.8 gigahertz downstream, increasing the upstream to 684 megahertz possibility. But there's no silicon available yet that I know of.
Yep.
So it's like putting
It
it
could be a very long
downstream.
wait for 4.0, but I can also see why operators would want to say, I want 4.0 because I want to get extended spectrum. Maybe I want to do full duplex. There's a lot of
And then
wait a
you'll
little while.
pay a higher premium, right? Because new
And if
technology.
they wait for 4.0, just imagine how cheap DOCSIS 3.1 modems will be. Chat room said there's another modem, the Cisco 93240 220V, 220 volts or 220V. With that modem, John, are you?
They said Cisco though, because we get out of the CPE industry.
Yeah, it's probably now under the other company's name that's still in the same building. So.
Yeah. Why am I losing my mind?
You should know it better than me. Who is it, Mia?
I know, right?
Technicolor. Mia
Yeah.
says it's Technicolor. Yes, that's who it is.
There it is.
I said that's an amplifier. Oh, it must be a home amplifier because he was previously saying 85 megahertz house amps, as a replacement for the 65 megahertz house amps. So we were talking earlier about why not put eight TDMA channels, and I said 42 megahertz house amp.
Yeah.
But so that's a house amp that he's talking about.
Okay. Yeah, so on the front of Wi-Fi 6, CPE, yeah, I don't see anyone going to hold out for a DOCSIS 4.0 CPE.
Yeah,
it's just not going to happen.
It'd not be our recommendation.
And I think that's the other point was time to market. And I come to that realization as well is fiber to the home sounds great, but there's times where time to the market could be your limiting factor there as well.
Yes.
Even my manager said, fiber to the home, you could argue is for greenfield. Why wouldn't you do fiber to the home? But if you already run a DOCSIS network and you don't have the back office for fiber to the home, that's a hefty upfront cost to start from scratch. Like you already have a GPON, EPON back office and stuff like that. Greenfield, you're going to do fiber to the home all the time.
But I don't know. I think that's I see a lot of operators, even small operators, being able to get into fiber to the home with there's like even if you go out and get Unify equipment, Unify has like pawn equipment that small operators who have no infrastructure for fiber, they can jump right into it. That larger operators can jump into that. So I think
Okay.
fiber for Greenfield is definitely the way to go on that. You know, we're both
I
DOCSIS
give you
guys, but
one more holdup is video. Unless you're
yeah,
doing over the top IP video, you got to do something else, right?
or you
And
just
you're
get
not
out
going
of
to do,
video altogether. Operators are losing money on video. It used to
yeah,
be sports. We were talking about this the other day. ESPN was a great revenue maker. A lot of things have changed just in the last few months. It is a tough thing to keep and to
that's
keep
because
sustaining.
and I'm not privy to all the costs associations with the broadcasters and all that, but they charge per sub, right?
Yeah.
ESPN, Yankee Entertainment Sport, the Yes Network in New York. I remember there was a lot of problems with that. CBS, Fox, there's NFL Network. There's always negotiations about how much do they get from the cable company, right, per subscriber.
Yep. And
Yeah, so
and
yeah, I could see this is one of those drinking games, paradigm shift. Drink.
yes.
Bingo, bingo, paradigm shift. It's like how, how to, and I said this from the beginning 20 years ago, we cannot afford to be a dumb pipe. If we just offer speeds with no thought to quality of service and content is king, someone else is going to use our pipe for their self. And that's what's been happening. Netflix is like, well, you guys got a fast pipe, but I'm not going to kick anything back to Comcast. But Comcast might have got smart with it and said, I'll tell you what, we're going to work with you, Netflix, and to make sure that the customer has good quality for your application, but then we'll share some revenues or whatever they're doing. You know,
We need good infrastructure though, John. And I think part of that is just having a really good pipe.
yeah,
And I think that's so. Also DPoE, DOCSIS provisioning over Ethernet. Brian brought up. You know, I think that's an easy way that you can go from being a just cable provider to being a fiber provider to having a really into those greenfield networks. Lots of ways you can do it. If you're a cable operator and you want to get into fiber, it's not that difficult to do.
yeah. There
So
was there's some customers I have in Europe doing still doing RFOG, RF over glass.
yeah,
Sometimes called DPON, DOCSIS provisioning, uh, DOCSIS
DP,
passive
DPoE.
optical network,
Okay.
DPON. So DOCSIS passive optical network or RFOG, RF over glass. And the only pitfall to RF over glass would be I have not seen an ONT above 85 megahertz. I haven't seen a 204 ONT. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Maybe they'll make one. But I also know that we don't support OFDMA, DOCSIS 3.1 on an RFOG network.
Yes.
And and the interesting things we found, and you could appreciate this one, OFDMA doesn't burst up the whole OFDMA channel. And I think we might have brought this up
We
before.
talked last week about, yeah, it just
Yeah,
doesn't work with our fog.
yeah.
They don't
And
play
it
well
bursts
together.
up in 400 kilohertz at a time. So if an individual modem bursts up one mini slot of 400 kilohertz, and it doesn't burst up the whole 96 megahertz if it was a full OFDMA channel, the
Not enough
power,
energy.
the power, yeah, 10 times the log of 96 divided by 0.4. You
Yeah.
do the math, it's like off by 16 dB.
And so the
So
laser never turns on.
yes,
In
exactly.
the device, that laser never turns on, doesn't see the energy, and
Yeah,
so it's like a tree in the woods falls. Do you ever hear
yeah.
it?
And the real big problem is for our fog, you want only one laser at a time to turn on. So what happens if I use one mini slot and you use one mini slot? So we're on at the same instant in time.
That's a
Now we
collision
have
then.
OBI, optical beat
Yeah,
interference. So yeah, it's
optical
a
collision.
double-edged sword.
All right, John. Anything else in this topic? I think we've covered it well.
Um, so Wi-Fi 6. Um, what else we got in there? CPE, DOCSIS 3.1. Yeah, I think we hit all the
Buddy,
high points.
did. So, John, I think our next podcast is what's the date, Mia? Do we have a date for that? We don't have a date, but we have another podcast coming up at least within a month. So everyone, if you like this podcast, appreciate you watching, please do hit the subscribe button. And if you want to be notified of upcoming podcasts, click that little bell and you'll get an email anytime we upload a podcast or we go live. So, John, appreciate your time. Good information. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll be back next month. So long,
Hey,
all.
by the way, wait,
Oh,
don't turn off my Cisco Live. I talked about Cisco Live. My own session was I did recorded 3 videos, so I have a video on demand, and it was released last Thursday. And I talk about capacity planning, laser clipping because of congestion, analog lasers, and CMTS, what you can do on a CMTS to alleviate or mitigate congestion, and then how to add more capacity. Some of it, like we talked about, is Captain Obvious type of stuff. Just add more capacity, add more 3.1. If it hurts when you do that, don't do that. Some problems. But I give actual information. Like one of them was, it's not on by default. When a modem comes online on a Cisco CMTS, the registration quality of service is priority 0. So if you already have a lot of modems online running traffic and you have high congestion, the next modem that tries to come online might never get past a NIT D because it doesn't have a high priority. So there's a command to change that 0 to a 7 if you really wanted to. So there's some real information that I give customers or people to use, not just, oh, well, think about this, think about that. I get tired of those too. You got to think about this, you got to think about that. Well, I did think about this and that. That's why I'm talking to you. I want to know what I can do.
do you have links to this that we can watch? We'll put it in the show notes, or is it behind a curtain?
Maybe you can throw it on the podcast or whatever. Or
yeah, if you got links, send it to us and we'll put it in the podcast.
Okay. And I know I put the link on the LinkedIn, one of the LinkedIn websites or the LinkedIn page.
All right.
But I'll make sure that you have it too, so you can put it on and tag it to the podcast or something.
All right. So our next podcast, we'll send us those links. We'll put it in that. Our next podcast is with the CTO of Technics, and we'll be getting him in and talking about some cool things with extended spectrum, mid split, high split, all kinds of cool technologies on that. We're looking for it to go. So, all right, that's a wrap, guys. Thanks everyone. Take care and so long.